Welcome to the CoinGeek Weekly Livestream. I'm your host, Patrick Thompson. I'm clearly not Kurt. I'm subbing in for him. He hasn't been feeling well, but I'm sure he'll be back up and running next week. So before we get into today's show, I guess I'll talk about the market just for a second, just to sort of recap some events that are going on. BSV is up 7% today, and that's a huge move. That's a huge move in any market. My personal opinion is I think we're seeing a bit of a relief rally taking place in the digital asset space. I think a lot of people think that the worst of what could happen, all these companies going bankrupt, or you're hearing about insolvency and that they don't have money to pay customers. I think a lot of people think that the worst of that is over, and I think the market's starting to reflect that. But at the same time, I think some of these new events are getting unearthed where people are questioning if Coinbase really has all this money that they say that they have. If Nexo really has this money, if they're really solvent. So I think both factors are at play. It's just something you want to keep an eye on, but we haven't seen a move like that in a while. So I think it's kind of important to spend a little bit of time on it and see what's going on. Now, I guess I'll introduce the guest. You'll see him after the advertisement we're going to bring in. But today we're talking to Bryan Daugherty. He does a lot of work with the Bitcoin Association. He is the co-founder, CEO of Smart Ledger. And, you know, I don't want to waste any more time. We're going to bring in the advertisement, then we're going to hop right to Bryan, and we're going to dive into all sorts of topics today.
What does it take to make something useful? The will to do so. Gate to chain.
And here we are with Bryan. Bryan, how are you doing, man?
Great, Patrick. Thank you for having me on, and I really appreciate the time and chance to speak with you today.
Now, I did a small introduction of you. Hopefully, I didn't get anything wrong. I know that you work with quite a few people over at Smart Ledger. I know you do quite a bit of work with the Bitcoin Association. But just in case I messed up, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the audience about, you know, where you spend your time and energy?
Sure, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I do quite a bit of work for the Bitcoin Association, where I the global public policy director. I spend a great deal of time educating lawmakers, policymakers, even staffers, you know, to understand the utility aspect of blockchain, specifically what BSV offers. And, you know, as far as other hats, you know, Smart Ledger is a company that I helped co-found with Sean Ryan. You know, a few years ago, we've, you know, put together an incredible team of, you know, just really experts and professionals in this field, and have really networked our way to really building an incredible distribution channel for enterprise grade, you know, products. And that was one of the gaps that I noticed from my previous career as a, you know, enterprise sales and hardware consultation transformation consultant. And, you know, a lot of the technology is distributed through a distribution channel, and most of the major distribution channels just overlook blockchain simply due to the same issues that we encounter for political reasons or for, you know, media reasons. It's really the hyper focus on speculation and media. So Smart Ledger really spends a great deal of effort trying to educate people as well. So there's a lot of, you know, work that kind of goes right in hand with, you know, educating policymakers as well as entrepreneurs, investors, and developers, you know, to bring them into this space and really show them the utility that this technology provides.
Now, you said a lot that I want to unpack there, right? What caught my ear was the distribution channels, of course, the policy regulation kind of stuff. So let's start with distribution channels, because I feel like that's a common problem that a lot of blockchain companies, especially the ones that, you know, me and you probably work with and see often, it's probably a problem that they feel like they have, where I see people come up with great apps and services, but maybe they don't know how to get it to that ideal end user, whether that be an enterprise who licenses the software, or even just if it's consumer facing, how to really grow and make the most of the market. So in the work that you do day to day, and when it comes to distribution channels, like maybe what bit of advice would you have, or like what's a good approach for some of these businesses to take to probably be more successful than they currently are when trying to get their solution out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are some. This is an emerging field, obviously. Where I feel like BSV and a lot of the companies that are within this ecosystem are very much at the spearhead of innovation and technology and blockchain. So there is substantial obstacles to overcome for any business beyond just bringing a product to market. But specifically with technologies, 97% of all technology is brought to a market by a distribution channel. And that's due to because they have, the trusted relationships already with many of the managed service providers, which rely on them for the education of those products, right, and the support of those products. And you'll see large manufacturers, technology manufacturers, Microsoft, Cisco, HP, they all kind of work very hand in hand with, the TD SYNNEXes of the world or the Ingram Micros of the world. And these are huge companies most people have never heard about. They're multi-billion-dollar companies, but they don't really work in the forefront, right? They're not advertising to you in the Super Bowl. They're just there to support this ecosystem and infrastructure that they're providing information, access, and expertise. And this is very much what we feel Smart Ledger provides. I think we're a little bit hybrid model in the sense that we also create our own bespoke solutions, which we can get to later on. But going back to your question, as far as what businesses or companies and developers can do to really kind of get a foothold in that market, it's not the matter of how much marketing dollars you spend or what amount of people that you bring to your team. It's not quantity. It really is the quality of relationships that you foster. And I think almost every technology company, whether they're working with Smart Ledger or some other distribution channel, and I don't believe Smart Ledger will be the only distribution channel. I do feel like TD SYNNEX and Ingram Micro will come into this space once they understand the utility that this provides. And Smart Ledger can at least be a roadmap for them to understand and help them identify, the 25 plus vendors that we've identified that provide real world utility with blockchain technology. So my best advice would be, really document everything for one, right? Every development that you're creating, it's very important that you document the development process and that, you also, that you really reach for compliancies. And, we do a lot of talk about technology compliancies now, whether it's, an ISO certification, and I think that's one of the areas, sorry, there's a huge truck going by, but that's one of the areas that I think, that we can focus on here in the future is really providing a compliancy for BSV as an infrastructure. Then to build upon that for the companies, it's less of an obstacle to get certified from there, right? And then once you have that certification, large entities will open the door because it's almost as if you're saying, I'm federally, my funds are federally insured here, right? And I think it's important that, it's easy to develop some disruptive technology today, right? Understanding, what pieces are available to you from, say, the BSV perspective. But for a developer to also run a company, and sell that product and support that product, you definitely need a team. And whether you work with other companies that can fulfill those holes for you, or whether you work with a company that can kind of guide you through that process. I think Smart Ledger can do everything from providing that information on both sides, from business development to technology expertise.
And let's say someone's sitting at home right now and they're wondering, like, what value could Smart Ledger add to me or my business as sort of the distribution channel partner? Like, what would that look like for them if they, or maybe another way to put it, or another part of the question is like, who is a good potential client for Smart Ledger? Like, what makes a good partnership with Smart Ledger? When should people be looking to work with you guys?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's a double-sided question, right? So we're looking for great customers, and I'm sure customers are also looking for a great company to work with, right? And sometimes those don't always work out. So it is a matter of understanding their needs, their wants, their expectations, their roadmap. So you have initially some questions to kind of cross T's and dot the I's of, and understanding, what type of budget, what type of timeline they're looking at, what type, has somebody actually asked you to build this product, right? And is this something that's viable? And is this a good fit for our company? Is this something that works for Smart Ledger in the future, as far as, that it's going to provide utility, or, perhaps it's something, that is, not, regulatory friendly, then obviously we want to keep our hands off of that. So really it's, a discovery call of really finding what those needs and requirements are, and then really fine tuning of understanding that problem. We're not an expert in every industry or sector. We definitely have access to, a lot of different experts in different fields. However, we really rely on those customers who know those problems intimately more than we do. And then we apply, the features and functions of blockchain, or, we align those partners and vendors that we've got relationships with to, really provide a solution that, will give them a benefit of, more efficiency, lower costs, more productivity.
So I'll jump in there, right? Because, me and you have quite a few conversations throughout the week. But one of the things that we kind of touch on is that right now there are so many efforts in either Congress or, letters go into the White House that, like, blockchain technologies are this energy consumption devil that doesn't produce any good in the world, except, they're just mining for revenues. And something I wondered, something I think, I asked you, something I think it's important to explore is, why isn't the conversation, why isn't the focus on kind of these blockchains that with utility like BSV, where, people they're not just mining for revenue, but the transactions that are being put on chain are actually serving businesses, right? They're actually meant to create efficiencies in the enterprise world. Maybe it is crucial data that's being timestamped that'll be referred back to important records. Why don't the conversations focus on things like that? And why is it always just on, maybe what people would call the negative externalities of mining all sorts of different digital assets?
Yeah, you're spot on once again. I mean, the reality is there's a few reasons potentially why. Obviously, the speculation and hyper focus on this crypto casino is, something that engulfs the media, which engulfs, most of the reporting on this type of subject. And, it's a salacious story, right? I mean, if a stable coin goes to zero, or, some guy who's, just invested millions and now he's underwater because of it. It's a story that sells, so that's type of the culture that we live in. So there's that. And then ultimately, I think that there's just a general lack of knowledge or curiosity, especially by those in the research field that, I've read countless reports about energy consumption and Bitcoin and blockchain and you name it, all sorts of consensus protocol reports. And, almost every single researcher says, when you get to proof of work, it is the most secure system, and they, right before they pivot, they're like, if only it could scale, but since it can't, let's go look at this. Right. And then there's the next 50 pages of the report about something that's less secure, that doesn't maintain the integrity of that data, which then ultimately you have to question, what is the use of energy for? But ultimately, I think most people overlook the actual incentivization that this global innovation provides, like, the transparency and the fraud prevention alone, right? I mean, when you start applying fraud prevention in no matter what industry or sector, you start seeing the true value of having a more secure system that provides some level of confidentiality of records, integrity of records, and availability of records. So until people, and more so researchers and, those push back on the media, as well as just your everyday person who understands the utility that this blockchain provides, it is upon all of us to really make an effort to reach out to policymakers and lawmakers. Don't just rely on me. I promise you, I'm doing everything I can. But honestly, I think we need everybody to participate. There's no reason why we can't do a red letter campaign to, local assemblymen and state legislators and federal legislators. And, we should be reaching out and providing this type of information. And we are so from the Bitcoin Association and Smart Ledger point of view by providing, responses to, requests for information. We just recently responded to an Office of Science and Technology from the Office of the President. And, we were able to kind of coordinate responses from TAL, Onchain, and Smart Ledger to, very specific questions that, government officials have. And just, not to, iterate too long on this, but I think it's such an important topic. The conversations that I'm, having daily with policymakers, this is a very unique and rational perspective. I mean, it resonates with everyone, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent. There's utility and rational thought in these discussions, because you're right, not all transactions are valued the same. When I think of something that a transaction such that CertaHash would produce, where you're mitigating the actual detection time of a network breach from 212 days to nearly instant, well, that seems to have a lot of value if it was able to alert a CISO in near real time to tell him that you've been potentially hacked. Why? Because here in the United States, it costs over $9.7 million for a hack or a data breach to go unnoticed for more than 30 days. Globally, that's almost 5 million. That's a lot of money. And so when you start really kind of looking at the value that these transactions provide and the utility provides, this is something that gives us a national, a regional, economic, economic boost. It gives us, information data security. It provides energy security, and just lastly, I just came across the article the other day of, a publicly traded blockchain mining company that's based in Texas that, shut down their mining facility because of the, pressure on the Texas grid that day. Now, granted, you can think of that and you're like, wow, that's, very thoughtful, of that CEO to make that decision. But now think about if that energy grid, the microgrid, the transactions, the data, the interchange of money and data was, helping to support and provide the communication and integrity of that system, the security of that system. Would you want somebody like a TAL to turn off their processors because, they're not just, aiming to fish for coins of a ever decreasing subsidy? They're providing real world utility and security that just is not capable in today's legacy environments.
Right. And, that's something that Kurt touches on from time to time, because he, co-founder of Gorilla Pool, for those who don't know, but doing a lot of work with, these mining companies. And what he was telling me is sometimes the electricity provider, or they're shocked to learn that, like, you can't just shut off this thing that's, logging crucial transactions on chain. It's not just this thing where you're fishing for money, that if you were to lose power, if these facilities were to go down, that there is businesses who are effectively not able to operate because, their service provider is no longer to, provide the electricity they need to secure the chain to get these transactions up there. And I want to hit this question because it was something that you were touching on a little bit earlier when you were talking about policymakers. So here we have a question from Zap70 who says, I believe that regulation has to be finalized before BSV blockchain and surviving crypto can grow. When will the SEC drop the hammer, and is the effort bipartisan? Bryan, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, it's a great question. When you're really working with a lot of these policymakers, they're, very entwined, as far as their thoughts and directions and understanding of the technology. And so my worry is that there's a rush to define terms, there's a rush to, create bills and amendments, right, that potentially harm, the opportunity for a scalable enterprise proof of work blockchain to, to really grow and blossom, to provide this utility, right? And so I am okay with, being more pragmatic from a government standpoint in approaching this. I think, as we all understand, that anybody that's been in this industry for any amount of time, every day is like, equivalent to a month, right? So it's like we're on an entirely different planet, an entirely different universe. So, tomorrow, who knows what happens? I mean, what happens if Tether goes up, in the next 3 or 4 days, or Coinbase supposedly goes bankrupt? And, as much as I really feel like I think we missed the boat to protect some of these consumers in 2017, when some of these issues started to really be more prominent and in your face, that, at this point, I really think that the conflation of the terms cryptocurrency and blockchain, we need to separate them significantly, right? And I don't think we're there yet. And so, as much as I agree that, until regulation really starts to substantiate itself and separate the wheat from the chaff, there is a possibility where the baby is thrown out with the bathwater, right? Not to give a bunch of analogies.
I'll even jump in here, right? Because I definitely understand the angle that there needs to be more regulation before something like BSV can grow. But at the same time, I think especially, they mentioned the SEC in the question. I think what they're more interested in is protecting the consumer and the investor. I think when it comes to companies, and maybe you'll be able to, chime in with your experience talking to lawmakers and such, I think they want guidance. They don't necessarily need I don't know, like policies that enforce this, that, the other. I think they just need to know, like, hey, should I be reporting on this or should I not be reporting on this? And I think the issue is with the lack of that. If somebody's not telling a company they need to report, they probably find it beneficial not to report. And then that's when things can get chaotic, where, and we see this in the mining world, right? Where there was a letter that was written to Congress recently where they wanted them to report CO2 emissions and some other sort of data. But if there's no requirement requiring them to do that, they probably feel like it's beneficial for them not to give up that information. And then when it comes to the bipartisan angle or not, I don't know. I feel like there's always going to be different angles and opinions coming from, both sides of these political parties. I think people have different agendas for different reasons. But how about you, Bryan? Do you think that from some of these folks that you talk to, is one party, more pro than the other? Is one party really trying to hold it back? What do you see?
So I think there's contingents on both sides that either, depending on the region that they represent, right? I mean, if you're a very energy strong state, here in the United States or country, then you're going to have a totally different view upon that than somebody who doesn't have a lot of renewable resources at your availability. So I do think that there, obviously regional differences, and that's the way that the United States is supposed to be, right? We elect these regional leaders to represent, those concerns of the constituents of the region that they, represent. But I think, to answer your question, yeah, there are those, more, say, right-leaning or conservative-leaning that really, resonate with the idea of, data integrity and information security and cybersecurity. This is an innovative technology that can really bolster and give us a competitive advantage, and then on the left, or on, the Democrat side, you'll see a range of people that are very pro ESG, or that ironically, when they understand, the obstacles that face an enterprise, right, with even just say ESG reporting, there's no guidance. So, and you hit it right on the head and this is where I find a lot of actual synergy coming from both sides is by bringing those guys to the table, right? So you bring the enterprise and you bring, the representative to the table because they're advocates of each other. They just need to speak the same language and be on the same mission, right? And, that's where I think there's a lot of work to be done to build those and foster those relationships, not just as, an information expert or a subject matter expert, but as really kind of a uniter of this is a problem. These are issues, whether say interchange fees for businesses that are, are facing ever increasing fees for transactions, and or whether it's, an ESG reporting and we're not sure how to attest to the data that 7 years from now you may require us to provide, and we don't know how to prove that, whether we've changed that or not, right? And we see the IRS with an army of people now, going back years of greenwashing statements. And, these are things that are just coming out more and more in everyday news.
And I'll jump on the last part of their question there before I want to bring in those two questions from Kurt. But part of it was they said, when will the SEC drop the hammer? Now, do you have any sort of estimate on when any kind of regulation or guidance is going to come? Because that's a question that I think people have been having for a long time. Gary Gensler, whenever he talks, he's always making these threats that it's on the horizon. But at this point in time, I think it's been a couple of years since he's begun saying that, probably 2 years, maybe 1.5 years. And I think people are still waiting for, like, did the Gensler hammer drop yet? Did he do that thing he said he was going to do? So when do you think we're going to see something that's probably more impactful than some of the stuff that we've already seen take place, or some of the conversations that definitely scare people, I think, to react one way or another? And I think that kind of has the effect that the policymakers are going for. But as the question said, when will the hammer drop?
Yeah, well, I think this is a very carefully orchestrated dance across a multitude of departments and agencies. With the Biden August report, coming out, I think that may begin, the series of dominoes of things that occur to really, move this a lot faster than what we've seen in the past. It's very hard to say, it's going to happen this date or that date, but I do think it's closer than farther away. And, I think one of the ways that you can kind of judge that is from my observations, at least from the Biden administration, it seems like they're taking a very similar path and road as the EU has by making this much more of a environmental discussion rather than any other type of discussion. And that's where, again, I think we all have to be our best advocate, our own best advocate. And if you see something, if you want to see something happen, then speak out, reach out to your representative, reach out, to Gary Gensler or whomever, and, voice these concerns, whether it's about consumer protection or whether it's about, the potential stagnation of innovating, on a proof of work scalable blockchain.
Now let's get to that first question from Kurt here. It says, lots of people hate the politics of ESG. Can we talk about why ESG benefits are just a byproduct of efficiency? So Bryan, that one's all you, man.
Yeah, sure. I mean, ESG, and both Kurt and I actually, come from, a personal political world where we're very huge proponents of, liberty and freedoms and transparency and honesty. And, ultimately I've, maybe coined this term where I am not enviro man. I really just want to see, honesty in these types of conversations. And through that process and through that proof of ESG initiative, one of the things I've noticed, is if Bitcoin could solve the ESG problem for Bitcoin, it can solve the ESG problem for any industry and sector. And by that, I mean providing honesty and transparency of records. And so the efficiencies that implementing various features and functions of blockchain, whether utilizing CertaHash for cybersecurity or another application, now you're again saving all of this money that you potentially would have paid, right? If the technology works as it IBM and Smart Ledger team says it does, right? Then you've just been able to mitigate the detection time of a network breach significantly, substantially beyond what is possible with mission critical records, which are only actually monitored every 5 minutes. So now you're saving a lot of money. You're potentially saving documents and data from making it to the dark web, whether your customers or your employees. And now you have all this efficiency or money or energy that wasn't spent, because time is money, energy is money, right? That can be applied in various other ways. So, for me, as much as, maybe the woke side of ESG or, the World Economic, Forum view or the Agenda 21 view, there are causes to be concerned about this technology be utilizing to displace, people rather than empower them. But, I look at this as a truth machine, a universal source of truth that really promotes a more green economy, not by force, right? And not by public humiliation, even though you can gamify it, but more so by, creating efficiencies that just weren't available before.
Right. And I think when that takes place, right, it spills into, every single letter of ESG. I think the environmental and the governance ones are kind of two examples that are right in people's faces. But I think, and I know if people want to check it out, you did a great, I can't remember if it was a podcast, if I read a written interview, where you kind of touch on the benefits that blockchain has when it comes to solving some of these ESG problems like greenwashing. So when people have the chance, if I remember correctly, you did that with the Food Institute, but they should check that out when they have the time. Now, the second part of Kurt's question, or maybe this is question number 2, he says it's the same with regulations. People don't like regulators, but then 99% of these unregulated companies just run predatory Ponzi schemes. How do we clean this up?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine balance, right? I mean, first and foremost, let's make sure that there's laws and rules that apply generally, and then, instead of always trying to take a surgeon tool to every specific and making a new law. I'm not always a huge fan of that, but I do think that there's a significant need for consumer protection, and especially in the crypto verse, right? This crypto casino. I mean, we see it more so even ever in just the last few months with exchanges, wallets, and just financiers behind the scenes that are just going belly up or have really made some horrific financial choices. And who ultimately pays for that is the consumer, right? And I think ultimately there's still an iceberg of consumer issues that are ahead of us, right? Especially with a potential chain death of BTC in the future, where who's to say I'm able to even send my BTC that I own to somewhere to exchange, right? And with Celsius users now, I mean, the majority of them have or Coinbase users who have staked for ETH 2.0. Like, what happens there? Like, these are serious concerns. And also, I think we need to dial back and see what those thoughts were to prior to that, because none of this stuff from at face value seems either rational or sustainable, right? And I think that that's probably the biggest smack in the face is you had companies that were even going out to say that you were FDIC insured with this, right? And that there's already laws and regulations that go against these. And what I think needs to happen is people need to get their hand more than smacked, and they need to legitimately be held accountable.
I like that you said that, and something that I've heard before and I agree with. Being stupid should hurt, right? When people when people aren't complying, when people are going against these regulations, it shouldn't just be this thing where they pay a sum of money that's insignificant to them. Like, no, there should be actual enforcement, actual actions that happen that make them regret that they made this illicit decision that they shouldn't have made. And now, when you were answering the question, you said something that I think we should explore more. Do you think that policymakers need to create a fresh set of laws for some of these crypto things that have appeared over time? Or do you think that the laws that exist kind of capture what goes on in the crypto world, and they just need to start enforcing them and telling companies, hey, you need to report to this agency, that agency?
Yeah, well, code is not law, right? So, I mean, there are laws that exist on the books today, and I'm not a lawyer or a legislator, so I can't tell you every single one. But there are laws that exist, that do apply. And I don't necessarily feel they need to focus so much on creating a new set of laws. However, they do need to really, be pragmatic and spend a great deal of time defining these terms, right? Because before you can legislate, you must define these terms that you're legislating of. And, that's a slippery slope. And then beyond that, there's infrastructure that needs to, change within the way that, the government operates. And I'll just give you an example. CanStats, the Bureau of Canadian Statistics, they monitor all of these statistics from around their business environment, right? And they provide this data up into legislators who then are able to kind of make decisions. Well, mining companies such as TAL are actually classified as an information technology company, right? Well, are they? I mean, yes. I mean, from my perspective, they are. But if you wanted to get granular with data and you wanted to see, mining industry information, then you need to go back down and you need to really start thinking about even the classification of some of these types of businesses. And, that doesn't just apply to mining. I think it applies to some of the other, business entity types that we've seen pop up. And, first and foremost, they need to be held to, the fire of legality of whether that's, a real thing, right? Or a legal thing. And, the terms, whether you're talking about a decentralized autonomous authority, right? Or organization, you have to define those terms, and we all have to come to agree what those terms actually mean.
I think you nailed it. And from time to time, I've heard you talk about the education gap that exists, and that's probably step one in the education gap, right? People need to understand what they're talking about in the first place and what it really means. I guess there's two things. One, I do want to switch gears to proof of work kind of stuff because I'm conscious that, we're probably at like 20 minutes left. So I want to ask you, how serious do you think it is that proof of work mining, all these bans, these moratoriums that are out in the United States, do you think that's a legitimate threat to proof of work blockchains?
Absolutely. I think it's probably, the number one threat. And it's something that requires our immediate attention. I'm focusing quite a bit of effort on really educating a lot of the new miners that have come to the U.S. Thankfully, Liz Lee from our China hub manager, she's coming over, and we're catching up here next week for a mining conference down in Miami. And then we're going to be spending quite a bit of time reaching out to miners to educate them on just the general economics of mining, but also to kind of provide that gap, or bridge that gap, like I mentioned before, with policymakers to, have them understand the utility that they provide. And, specifically with New York State, where they've already, effectively placed a ban and moratorium on proof of work miners from expanding, this is a great opportunity while they study over the next 2 years to get into that, into the weeds with them, with defining these terms, with providing language, that can potentially open the door for something that does provide utility it shouldn't be anti-proof of work. It should be anti, huge carbon footprint or, anti-waste of energy, right? Like that's what we should be focused on, not specifically one consensus mechanism. And so from my view, I look at it as almost as if they're already saying, just very much like I said before with the research that has been done, and even Cambridge University's Bitcoin energy consumption meter, they've already assumed that BTC is this benchmark for proof of work, and they're moving on beyond it. And I think that that's the biggest fault, right? The biggest gap of education that we have to provide, that proof of work, or that BTC is not even good example of what energy utilization could be and what utility that a public permissionless blockchain could provide.
And first I want to say, Alex, let's save the questions for the last 10 or 5 minutes, because we'll get like to a rapid round of that. And I think it's important on the proof of work angle to explain. Now, a lot of people think proof of stake is a direct substitute for proof of work. And there's other people who just take the view, or I think objectively, that's just not the case. So do you want to tell the audience a little bit about why, proof of stake is not this direct substitute for proof of work, and maybe some of the efficiencies or how they accomplish different objectives, how some of those objectives are lost when you make the transition from one to the other?
Sure. So, I mean, I think the core, issue, and it, when you're talking about proof of stake generally, or you're talking about, say, an implementation like Ethereum moving to proof of stake, there's a couple different conversations there, right? But just proof of stake generally, you're taking the core, one of the core benefits of proof of work is the security is outside the system. And now you've placed this security mechanism inside the system with people that have relatively little, if any, skin in the game, especially if they were early adopters. And in the case of Ethereum, where 70% pre-sale, you have a small group of people that hold the majority of these coins, and say it takes 30 Ethereum to validate transactions, and there's no real identity associated with any of these validators. So I could be validating transactions that aren't true, right? And so you immediately remove the data integrity aspect of it, and you can't even begin to talk about energy efficiency without having at least data integrity and data security. Because right now, with the internet and with legacy cloud systems and legacy environments, we have somewhat secure systems and somewhat efficient systems, right? Like, we can't replicate what is being done on an S3 Amazon server today, right? It doesn't mean it doesn't potentially happen, but for for us to want to utilize any energy for any technology, it has to provide the utility back. And with proof of stake, once you separate the security, then it's just an added layer. It's just an added attack vector. It's just something to slow it down and cost more money. And that's exactly what it does, right? It doesn't scale. It doesn't provide any real utility, because you can't even attest to the data that's being put on there.
Something I'm wondering, right, is you see so many people in Congress, so many lobbying groups just doing the most to push against proof of work at the moment. I'm wondering, is there any of that against proof of stake, right? Because there's some clear attack vectors. We're kind of, like you said, these people who don't have skin in the game, and maybe that means it's a cryptocurrency exchange that just holds this big bulk of coins and tokens because their users keep their deposits online. But now, they're this big player in the voting mechanism where, they're not really interested. They just happen to be almost a honeypot, right? That is able to win a lot of blocks. Do people ever sound the alarm against some of these rounds with proof of stake, or we're not at that point yet because, right now it's just the proof of work is bad narrative is beginning to propagate?
Yeah, we also have to pause, right? Because I mean, obviously there's definitely an education piece, but we'd be we'd be lying if there's not potentially, a segment of a group of people that do not want this type of information security. Right now, think about that. Like, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why entities would not want another country to be able to, have that type of technology either. So who knows? I mean, this is also, a competitive thing that goes across, borders and just geography in general. So, you know, yeah, it's unfortunately that nobody really highlights a lot of the deficiencies of proof of stake and other, consensus mechanisms. I try to on my behalf, I try my best, but it's ultimately that it's almost like a FUD response of anything. And so I I think people resonate more with the actual utility discussion perspective that I share versus me, poo-pooing some other blockchain, right? Because especially with crypto, not blockchain, but crypto is extremely tribal, right? So, whether you owned Ethereum and you bought it at $70, try telling somebody, even at today's price, that, it doesn't do anything. And they want to, obviously, fight you to death on, it does.
Right. Yeah, I will say before we, start our round of questions, we're going to try to get through as many as we can. So if you haven't asked yours, you might as well, you'll want to ask in the next couple minutes. But it's kind of a shame that, these things are so tribal from time to time, right? Because, and something I wrote about recently, right? There's more drawbacks to being, all in on one tribe. And I guess just being ignorant to the idea that there's good ideas everywhere, right? It doesn't mean the implementation is always good. It doesn't mean the infrastructure is always good, but in my opinion, it means that we can kind of look around in different places and at least learn. And that's an important step because, if you learn, it's like when you know better, you do better. So seeing these ideas in different places, then knowing, either giving them advice of this is how you can do it right, or giving them the tools, the infrastructure they need to be as successful as they can. I'd like to start seeing more of that. Alex, let's go to the questions. Here we have DApp Institute, and if I'm not mistaken, that's Greg Ward. He deserves a shout out. So shout out to Greg. Do you feel ESG reporting based on utility per unit of energy, attested immutably on chain, would enable more trust in ESG initiatives, regulations, and requirements, or cause more uncomfortability?
Yeah, that's a great question, Greg. And shout out to you, Greg. I do think that it's a little bit of both, right? I do think from the business perspective, they're looking for these type of solutions. From as far as like a mining perspective of placing this type of data on chain, I also think that there's a viability for that, right? And I think that BSV is one interesting differentiator in that we do have things like miner ID that we are able to employ some of this substantial data in chain immutably.
I see a good question here from Sergio C. Alex, if you could bring that up, I'm just gonna, the first one you had up, but I'll just start reading it. Is there a way to protect the media uploaded to chain so that it remains private to the user, or simply by being on the chain is it public? Now, I wanted to talk about that, and I found it interesting because once I met a guy who was working on post-quantum solutions, and I feel like this question falls in line with that, where the concern was, hey, if we have this sensitive personal information on chain in a post-quantum world, where quantum computers are abundant, your data that was once private, that was once personal can be read now. So I guess I'll read the question a little bit again because I kind of went on a small tangent there. Is there a way to protect the media uploaded to chain so that it remains private to the user, or simply by being on the chain is it public? Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. You can encrypt that data in a multitude of ways, including ZK snarks. And, now that data is at least encrypted there. And there's tools that exist today, that you can go out and try that. I know Zachary Weiner from VXPass, recently created a tool to test putting anything on blockchain. I know Smart Ledger, we have our own tool. And Bitcoin files, I mean, you can try these and actually encrypt those data files and place them on chain.
Next one's not really a question, but I think it's worth commenting on. It's from Daz K2. It says, until crypto dies and it's safe for kids, the normal person won't use it. I'll touch on that before I pass it to you, Bryan, right? So I feel like a next evolution, and what I would personally like to see happen, is coins and tokens need to kind of disappear from apps and services. Blockchain infrastructure is perfect for a lot of use cases, but at the moment, at least, I think coins and tokens can be a point of friction where, hey, before you start using this thing I created, I want you to go out and buy this, and then you have to use it for every action on the app. So maybe I'll turn this comment into a question. What steps do you need to be taken before, crypto?
More public information, specifically with a lot of the markets that we're already engaged with. Our next phase is really rolling it out here at the end of the month to this really is happening, right? Like you can really peel it back and see the layers, and everybody wants things now or next week, but the reality is I'm willing to pay more for that attestation, right? And so it also provides obviously a unique way for businesses to interact directly with their consumers.
SEO thing that happens in an instant. The founders make their money and nothing else really happens. What we see in the world that we're in is people creating sustainable solutions that they either want to take it and be as successful as it can be with them as the founder, or maybe they do want to sell it into a legacy industry, and that's fine as well. I just think it's important to remember that solutions that stand the test of time also take time to create. So it's not going to be this quick thing that you see pop up overnight, or it takes a second. So even though it might feel like a crypto winter, there's no doubt in my mind, and I know the companies and the founders who are working on things, new solutions you haven't seen yet, that they're building. They are creating solutions that will revolutionize industries. And even though you might not be hearing updates about these things every single day, they are there and they're working on it, and you'll learn about it in the future because nobody wants to soon TM you. That's pretty much my sign-off message. I got nothing else for you guys. I just want to thank you for tuning into the CoinGeek Weekly Livestream. My name is Patrick Thompson. I was your host for today. If Kurt is feeling better, he will most likely be your host next week. If not, you are stuck with me. But regardless, you should just enjoy the rest of your day.
What does it take to make something useful? The will to do so. Gate to chain.